Rebuilding Syria. 7 years of war has devastated much of the country. Donald Trump says Saudi Arabia is ready to pay for reconstruction. But who will get the money? And how will it be spent? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Syria's 7-year war has transformed ancient cities into ghost towns. Entire neighborhoods wiped from the map. Schools and hospitals reduced to rubble, along with just about everything else. As the war seems to be coming to an end, reconstruction is required on a grand scale. The UN estimates it will cost at least $250 billion. Donald Trump says Saudi Arabia has agreed to help. He tweeted, Saudi Arabia has now agreed to spend the necessary money needed to help rebuild Syria instead of the United States. See, isn't it nice when immensely wealthy countries help rebuild their neighbors rather than a great country, the U.S., that is 5,000 miles away? Thanks to Saudi A. Now here's more from Rob Reynolds.
President Trump's tweet prompted more questions than answers. He didn't specify how much money Saudi Arabia would offer to rebuild Syria, when it would be given, how it would be spent, or, most importantly, who would receive the money.
Well, that's the big question is where exactly will this money go? And I think that obviously depends a lot on where Saudi Arabia wants it to go. We could probably assume it's not going to go to the Russians. It's not going to go to the Turks for where they're spending a lot on humanitarian aid for refugees. It's going to go somewhere else, and it may not go to the Assad regime either.
In October, the Saudi government delivered $100 million to the U.S. for Syrian reconstruction. But Trump's tweet seemed to imply more money would now be forthcoming. Trump has frequently complained about U.S. expenditures abroad and berated allies like the NATO countries and South Korea for not spending enough on defense. Alternately, he boasts about striking deals to save the U.S. money.
$533 million.
Monday's friendly tweet thanking the Saudis is symptomatic of Trump's enthusiastic attitude toward the kingdom. He shrugged off the conclusions of his own intelligence agencies that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman most likely ordered the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Trump said Saudi arms purchases and its strategic partnership with the U.S. outweighed international condemnation of the killing.
They see Saudi Arabia as a strategic partner in the region, and Trump has certainly gone out maybe kind of on the fence to defend that strategic partnership. And now he's saying, look, we're still committed to you. Now you've got to step up and do what needs to be done.
One thing is certain. After 7 years of a devastating civil war that is still underway, an estimated 500,000 people killed and about 5 million Syrians forced to flee their country, Syrians badly need vast amounts of aid. Whether they will get it and from whom remain unanswered questions. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Washington.
All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us here in Doha, Ibrahim Fraihat, Associate Professor of Conflict Resolution at the Doha Institute. From Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz, Director of the Center for Political Military Analysis and a Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. And from Moscow, Nikolay Surkov, Assistant Professor at the Moscow State Institute of Foreign Relations. Welcome to the program. Ibrahim, let me start with you. Based on this tweet from U.S. President Donald Trump, do you believe any kind of agreement about reconstruction in Syria has actually been reached between Trump and the Saudis?
Well, this, in fact, reminds me with his statements that Trump is talking always about building a wall with Mexico and that Mexico will pay for it. So this seems to be a pattern where he's volunteering others, to finance certain projects. And this seems to be the case as well here, because first of all, we have not heard any statements, any comments from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not in a position to finance a reconstruction process in Syria First of all, because reconstruction of Syria for Saudi Arabia means one major thing, which is the removal of the Iranian influence from Syria, which is not going to happen because Iran has invested so far 7 years, military, finance, and the troops on the ground. It's not going to trade influence for money. And for that reason, that's the only thing that Saudi Arabia would be an incentive for Saudi Arabia to finance and to pay for a reconstruction process. There is no political settlement, there is no political agreement that has been breached between the parties, which would allow Saudi Arabia to pay for this. And the other major problem, actually, when we talk about funding a reconstruction process in Syria, we're talking about the most conservative numbers, $200 to $300 billion. Saudi Arabia does not have the money to pay, not even fractions of this, one. And two, which is more important to be taken into consideration, in terms of Saudi Arabia's priorities, Yemen financing the reconstruction process in Yemen is Saudi Arabia's #1 priority. Yemen is Saudi Arabia's war. It's not the case in Syria. And for Saudi Arabia to pay for Yemen, it becomes more of a priority than Syria, which is not the case here, as he's talking about.
And Nikolay, let me go to you. I saw you nodding along as Ibrahim was talking about the economic situation in Saudi Arabia and whether or not Saudi Arabia would actually have the money to pay for reconstruction in Syria. What are your views on that?
Well, I agree that the price of the reconstruction will be huge, at least $200 billion, and that will require participation of many countries. The Saudi participation will be definitely welcome, but the Europeans will have to participate, the Iranians will have to participate, the Russians, everybody who is engaged in this conflict will have to invest in the future of Syria, otherwise the country will remain in ruins. So my expectation is that the Saudis will provide some money, but not even it's unlikely that they will give more than $10 billion. And they have other destinations, not only Yemen, but also there is Egypt, which needs support. There is Jordan, which needs support. So many issues and so many things to pay for. So I recall the experience of Iraq when the countries of the region and the Western governments, they discussed the reconstruction of Iraq. Even then, they couldn't collect more than $20 billion. So I don't expect that there will be a real, the Saudi money will make a real difference, even if they are prepared to pay this money. And besides, right now there are sanctions against Syria, and no one can really come and invest money in Syria. And there is a question of who will distribute the money. The Saudis, as far as I can judge, are ready to work with the current government, at least for the transitional period. But I seriously doubt that they will give money to Assad. They will wait until there is a new government, if there is any new government in Syria. And other countries, especially the Europeans, will act likewise. The only potential donors for Syria at the current stage are the Iranians, because they don't fear the sanctions. They are already under the sanctions, and they will get the major share, while others will only have to follow.
Richard, the reaction to these latest tweets from Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. must be one of absolute bafflement, right?
It hasn't received a lot of attention. I mean, the U.S. has been focused more on the wall issue, the closure of the government, and so on. I think that, I can't really add to I thought was very good analysis of Saudi resources, Saudi motivations, but I think what is clear is that President Trump does not want to pay for the reconstruction of Syria. And so whether it's Saudi Arabia, the Europeans, or some other group, he doesn't want the U.S. to do that. And that's in line with his general foreign policy that the U.S. should concentrate on challenges at home, such as immigration and other issues, and other countries closer to the regions of conflict should assume the lead role, at least in the reconstruction, if not the combat phases.
Ibrahim, Saudi Arabia has for so long said that Bashar al-Assad must no longer be the president of Syria. If they were to go along with this, does that mean that they have now accepted a reality in which Bashar al-Assad remains the president of Syria?
It's extremely important to understand the real position of Saudi Arabia on Syria. Saudi Arabia does not have a problem with the Assad regime. Saudi Arabia has a problem with the Iranian influence in Syria. So if the Assad regime is to accept Syria, a country free of Iranian influence, Saudi Arabia would come with the most generous amount in order to finance the reconstruction process in Syria. But that's very unlikely, because the Assad regime does not have the authority to remove the Iranian influence from Syria. And it's unlikely that he wants to do so at this moment, because it's still his country is not stable, and that he wants to keep his close allies, Iran and Russia, close to him. So the Assad, even again, the problem is that even if Assad regime accepts for an Iranian influence to be removed from Syria, then Saudi Arabia, how much Saudi Arabia is going to contribute? I remember when the reconstruction process in Yemen after Saleh regime was removed and Saleh stepped down, the international community was able to fundraise about $6 billion. Saudi contribution at the time was $1 billion. So Yemen is a national priority, a national security priority for Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about 1 to 2 billion. How much this is going to pay and how much this is going to contribute towards $200 to $300 billion in Syria, that's almost nothing. And for that reason, I think who's able to neutralize the Iranian influence in Syria is Russia, is not the United States, is not Saudi Arabia either. And whether Russia is prepared to neutralize the Iranian influence in Syria, I don't think so. Not at this stage, because I think Russia still needs Iran to balance with the United States and with Israel, especially because the relationship with Israel worsened after the downing of the Russian fighter jet in Syria, and Russia blamed openly and directly Israel for this. So Russia can use the Iranian card in Syria, and for that reason, I think we're talking about Iran staying for the moment, which means no money from Saudi Arabia.
Nikolay, let me ask you to expand upon what Ibrahim was saying there. He was talking about Iran's role in Syria and whether or not Russia would be okay with Iran continuing to have their footprint in Syria. What do you say to that?
Well, Russia is taking a pragmatic stance. We understand that without the Iranian support and without the pro-Iranian groups, it won't be possible to defeat the opposition, because the ratio of troops is 10 to 1. The Iranians are providing all the ground troops, while Russia is providing air support for the government. So Russia and Iran, at least at the current stage, are allies and are working together. So Russia cannot win this war the government of Syria cannot win this war without the Iranian support. And besides, Russia is not the one to decide who will stay in Syria and who will leave. This is the prerogative of the Syrian government. If the Syrian government is strong enough, I think President Assad will be interested in limiting the Iranian influence, because the majority of the Syrians are not happy about the scale of the Iranian influence right now, about the Iranian bases in Syria. But for that, you need a strong central government. Only the strong central government could do this, not even Russia, because Russia is now trying to balance between Iran, which is a valuable ally, and between Israel, which is also an important partner for Russia, not only in the Middle East, but on the global scale. So Russia will not begin a confrontation with Iran. But Russia can support the central government, and the central government can remove the Iranians if they choose to. Because I remember quite well the experience of the previous president, Hafez al-Assad, who was also cooperating with the Iranians, but he was always very cautious, and he always maintained his autonomy. He was never dependent on Tehran. So I think his son, Bashar al-Assad, will follow this example as soon as he has the opportunity.
Richard, there has been mounting concern being expressed from U.S. lawmakers as to President Trump's moves when it comes to Syria, his decision to pull U.S. troops from Syria. Will Congress in the U.S. be able to do anything to counter this, or should we expect this to play out the way Trump has said it will play out?
There's not much Congress can do, and as far as I understand it, the order's already been made to withdraw those forces. I mean, one of the arguments against the withdrawal was that the troops provided the U.S. with some leverage over the issues we're discussing. So if there are 2,000 troops in Syria, then Russia, Iran, and the Syrian government need to come to some accommodation with the United States to get them removed. And the thinking was the U.S. would bargain that for reductions in the Iranian presence and so on. Without that, the only levers the U.S. really has are the prospects of reconstruction aid, which we've now excluded, and then ability to veto resolutions in the UN and so on. So that was one of the concerns people had about the withdrawal, but I think it's going to occur. I mean, there's not much. The president has the authority as commander-in-chief to order the troops to leave, and Congress can sometimes block measures, but it's more, it would more be cutting off funds for deployment that's already occurred, not ordering troops back into the field. They just don't have that authority.
Ibrahim, from your point of view, from your vantage point here in the region, what is the reaction in the halls of power in the Arab world to all of this?
Well, the political situation in the Arab world is in total disarray. Actually, there is chaos everywhere. The Arab League is not in a position to make any decision over anything. And let's not forget, actually, the major crisis, political crisis that Saudi Arabia has with the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. That probably that Trump is capitalizing on this because the Saudi regime at the moment is in the most vulnerable position probably since 2001, since September 11th. So Saudi Arabia regime at this moment is not able to engage in this power struggle in the region because, again, it's a major concentration as to how to end this political crisis, which, by the way, Trump administration has used very well, whether in terms of trying to build relations and build deals and make arms sales and supporting the Saudi regime. So the Saudi regime is vulnerable, but I don't think that this is going to reach to a point where Saudi Arabia is willing to finance a huge task like the refinancing of the reconstruction in Syria. So for that, even if they want, they don't have the money to do that.
Nikolay, at this stage, with Russia playing such an outsized role in Syria, any reconstruction effort that goes ahead would have to be coordinated closely with the Russian government, would it not?
Well, not necessarily. First of all, any reconstruction effort must be coordinated with the government in Damascus, because they are the ones who control the situation on the ground. The Russian military made certain assessments about the vital infrastructure that has to be rebuilt at the first stage. And Russian troops are doing lots of work, for example, demining the territories liberated from the ISIS, how it was happening in Deir ez-Zor, for example. So the demining work is in progress. Some humanitarian aid is provided, but the rest must be cooperated with the government. Russia doesn't have enough military personnel to be present everywhere. So Russia is playing more an important role in the south. For example, on the border with Damascus, on the border with Israel, in the southern areas. So there probably some coordination will be necessary. But still, the first place potential donors have to go to is Damascus and to coordinate with the government. So this is the issue. Russia will definitely welcome any kind of support because here in Moscow there are very intensive discussions about the future of Syria, about how to bring back stability. And it is clear that without rebuilding the infrastructure, without rebuilding the houses, without creating jobs for the Syrian, it won't be possible to reach a sustainable peace in the country. And this is the most urgent matter. But at the current stage, we don't see a solution. We don't see any potential donors. And even Russian companies cannot operate in Syria freely because of the severe international sanctions, which are still in place, the sanctions against the regime. So even Russian companies can't go to Syria to rebuild the oil wells, the oil fields. We can't help the Syrians in rebuilding energy infrastructure, electricity. So this is a huge problem. Only small steps are being taken. Sometimes Russian engineers can help rebuild, to restore electricity supply. Sometimes we can help in rebuilding a hospital or a school, but this is the only thing we can do at the current stage. And clearly, Russia wants to engage other international donors for the reconstruction of Syria, because Russia cannot do it on its own.
Richard, at one point this past year, it was reported that President Trump had an idea that perhaps Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries could send their troops into Syria to help secure it. Obviously, there's a lot more questions than answers right now when it comes to his tweets. But do you think that he might still be of this same mindset, or is he simply seeking Saudi Arabia to put money into the reconstruction effort in Syria?
Right. I haven't seen anything about, this idea of having a pan-Arab force, that would go into Syria to balance Turkey and particularly Iran in the last few months. I think that idea is not being actively pursued. I think his mindset now is get the U.S. out of this mess as quickly as possible, so pull out the troops, don't get involved in the reconstruction, and force other countries to take up the slack. So I think that the U.S. Syria was never a major priority for the administration, the way, for example, Iran and Korea was, and I suspect that it will fall even further in the next year.
Ibrahim, we only have about 2 minutes left, but I want to give you the last word here. Saudi Arabia, of course, has not yet reacted to these tweets by President Trump. Do you expect that they will?
Well, we have seen a pattern, actually, that they let these statements go and, not make any comments. I think it's about time, because once he makes these statements, there should be something coming out of Saudi Arabia, which hasn't happened so far. And again, let's remember that Saudi is in a very vulnerable situation now, because its major priority is how to end the political crisis of Jamal Khashoggi, the killing of him. And they're not in a position to go openly and counter Trump's statements, make contradictory statements to him, because they need him. He's the only one who's supporting the Saudi regime at the moment with regard to the issue where Khashoggi, where the pressure is in the Congress is huge. So it's not in their interest for now is to clash openly or on a Twitter account to send different Twitters.
You don't think it helps them at all to come out and say something?
Well, no, it helps them to come out and say something, but I don't think it's likely that they're going to. And if we hear something, it's going to be probably like shy statements about indirect thing, because they found themselves in this situation of being vulnerable in relation with Trump, who's the only one who's supporting the regime at the moment.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. So
thank you.
Thanks to all our guests, Ibrahim Fraihat, Richard Weitz, and Nikolay Surkov. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.